Hi, welcome back to Heather's Crochet Corner. This video is going to be a supplemental for my upcoming crochet class that's going to be on this Saturday, August 10th, being held at the North Grenville Historical Society. So if you are attending that class, it'll be great to see you there. If you're not able to make it, hopefully this information will help you. I've said it before in other videos, I do teach live classes, which is great. I partner up with the North American Historical Society because they offer a great space for me to do what I do. But again, in the 2 hours that I have set aside for those events, I often have a lot more information to share than I actually have time to offer to everybody. So this is again a supplemental. This next upcoming class will be covering the double crochet stitch, which basically looks like this in its most basic form. Actually, I do have a different swatch here to show you folks. All kinds of different examples. So this is what a double crochet stitch looks like, just in a single row. So you will be chaining, and then you add your double crochet stitch. So that's what that looks like. And with the double crochet stitch, what's really great about this, it's very versatile. So you can work it just as it is. And if you were just to add upon this, it basically looks like this in its pattern. And this was created just working through, like you've done your chains, you've chained 3 because that's the height of a double crochet stitch, and then you just work your stitch into the front and back loop of the stitch that you just made. So you're working in, you'll be creating, going this way into these spaces here. So that's just a single row. This is multiple rows, and what's nice is because it's so tall, you can actually see your rows, so they're easier to count. You can see your stitches because they create these lovely posts. So not only can you work your double crochets into both the front and back loop, you can work them into just the front loop. You can work them just into the back loop, which really creates a bit more stretch. And if you do them alternately, you get another little pattern, which is great, adds some texture. And because again they create these posts, you can work your stitches into this space, into what's known as the front post, or you can put your hook through the back side and work your stitches in what's called the back post. So yeah, you've got more options than you do with a single crochet or a half double. So again, you can work through both. You can work through just the fronts. You can work just the back, or you can work back post, or you can put your hook in this way and work front post. So in the next event I've got coming up on this Saturday, again covering double crochet, we're making a headband / ear warmer, depending I guess on how wide you want to make yours. This is what a twisted headband looks like. I've already done a video to help you guys who are following me along. So there's this. I have my notes on it because sometimes you make things a year ago, you don't remember. So it tells me I've done it double crochet. That's the stitch I've used. I chained 64 initially, and then because you are creating the height, your turning chain actually acts as your first stitch. So you actually end up with 62. I'd used a 5mm hook, which is my trusty 5 right here. And I happen to be working this particular headband back loop only. So I initially started off making your initial row, so it looked like this. But then once I chained 3 to get the height, I started working into the back loop only down the rest of the row. Then of course you turn your work, you chain 3 more, and then you continue to work the back loop only. So that's just an alternative. You can see the rows are a little staggered versus how they're all kind of just flat here. A little hard to tell probably, but there's a bit of a stagger, but it adds a bit of a stretch. Just adds a different look to it. So if you wanted to have a flat look, that's absolutely perfectly fine too. So this is just a twisted finished version of the Make It Home project for this coming class. If you wanted to have more of a flat look or a flat close, you could just sew up the ends here, and then this would be a perfectly fine headband as well. So those are your options. So that's what we're doing on Saturday, so hopefully you guys can join me there. And if not, then hopefully this tutorial will help to catch you up. And so with a double crochet stitch, you can just work it singly, work it through your top of the stitch, and then you'll have that flat pattern in the orange example. Or you can work through the posts, which gives you this lovely textured pattern, and it offers quite a bit of stretch. So working through the post, again, you're basically creating your foundation. You've got your first row of double crochets. You're chaining 3 to get the height, and rather than working through the tops like that, you're working your stitch and you're putting it through the back row, and then you alternate and you put it through the front row, or the front post, I'm sorry, you put it through the back post, alternate, put it through the front post, back post, front post, all the way down the row. And that's how you get this. So you're not doing anything different except for where you're placing your stitches. So you're still making the same stitch. You're still doing the double crochet. Again, rather than just working through the top, you're working through the posts. And you're just alternating back post, front post, back post, front post. And you can see which are your front posts because they stick out at the front. See? Versus your back posts that are all sort of pushed out at the back. So this stitch worked in this manner. It's very easy to see where your stitches are, where you're putting your stitches. So that is one option for you. These purple examples here, I think I've just done front loop only. So it's not a huge difference. So I was working them into just the front loops, just putting a double crochet into each of these front loops. So, I mean, not a whole lot different than the actual just a flat, but it just shows you how that looks. It's the same hook, same size yarn. So again, it's just your basic. Actually, I'll turn it over. That's the right side. That's your basic. This is your front loop only. This is working at back loop only. And this is working your posts, back post, front post. So same stitch, same hook, just worked in different areas. So you can see just the basic versatility of this stitch and where you place it. So that is that. I will set that aside for now. I've got other examples to show you. And speaking of front post, back post, got my notes here. Only hanging on to the hook so I can show you like a pointer. This is what we call a waffle stitch or a waffle pattern. And doing this, I'm going to just briefly cover it. I'm not going to actually demonstrate this. It's been a while. I'd have to practice it myself to make sure I've got it right, even though I left my notes on it. Basically, this pattern here, you have to chain it in multiples of 3 plus 2 for your turning chain. It's a 2-row repeat, so you do 1 row, and you do, actually, this is just your basic. So once you've done your chain, you're putting in a 1 double crochet, which is DC, into the 3rd chain from your hook. and then you're basically putting just one double crochet into each stitch or chain going across. And then this is where your repeat pattern takes place. You start with chaining 3 to get the height. You are turning your work because you got to go the other way, and you're putting in 1 front post double crochet, so you're working a double crochet stitch into the front post, and then you're doing just a regular double crochet, and you're repeating it across that row. So you're working into 2 areas. You are basically, I'll just simply show you here, here's your turning chain here, okay? You are doing a repeat pattern, so you chain 3, you've turned your work, here's your front post, you can tell because it sticks out to the front, and you're putting 2 double crochets into these spaces here, so you're not working through the post, you're actually putting it here, and then you're going back into the front post, and then you're working the top. Front post, working the top. So that's what row number 2 is going to look like. You're doing that repeat pattern all the way across, and then your next row, you're chaining 3, you're turning, and then you're going to do a double crochet, just put 1 double crochet into the top of the first stitch. Then you're doing a front post, you're doing a double crochet stitch into the front post for 2. Let's see if I have, so it's like back here. So here you're chaining 3, you are putting in a double crochet into the top, and then you're doing 2 double crochets into the front post, because that's what these are jetted out. This might be easier to see in the blue here. So yeah, you've got your turning chain, you've got your double crochet into the top stitch, you're working through both of them, and then you're doing front post crochet or front post position for the next 2 stitches, and you're repeating, putting 1 double crochet into the top through both loops, and then you're switching and you're working through the front post, down the row, and then you're just repeating 2, 3 until you get your project as tall or wide as you want. And that's how you create this waffle pattern. So there's that. So that's one more thing a double crochet stitch can do. Let's see, I've got other examples here. I'm not gonna make these examples on camera with you. Again, it's been a while since I've done it. I'd have to take some time to make sure I fully got a grasp on it, but you can make a chevron or slash ripple or slash wave. It's all called different things, but basically the overall look is very similar. Sometimes the points are very dramatic and very pointy. Sometimes they're more rounded. So again, if you're following this pattern, you're doing, it's just a single, you're just doing, I can't say single crochet because it's not, it's one individual double crochet stitch. It's a matter of placing it in certain spots. So this pattern here started off, oops, so where's my, here it is. Started off in the typical fashion, you've chained. In this case, you are chaining in multiples of 14 plus 4 to get the height. And that's what it says here. I mean, there are different variations of this, so just follow the pattern that if you find something and you think, wow, that looks really awesome, follow the pattern for that, because you might have really steep and pointier peaks and valleys. Mine are more rounded. But again, for this, I had to do it in multiples of 14 plus 4 to get this to work out. And I'll just sort of leave it, but again, it's important to know that it started off looking this, but as you increase your stitches, you're kind of making the peak part of it, and when you're decreasing your stitches, that's where you get like the valley part of it. So that's how that works out. Gotta trust the process on that. Again, if you're an intermediate crocheter and this makes sense to you, great. For me, again, this is just a supplemental. It's showing my absolute beginners that you can use this very basic stitch to create a variety of patterns once you're comfortable doing so. So that's an option for you. I just grab my hook, keep that there for reference. And you can also do the granny stitch. This is a granny stitch, and a granny stitch, basically you are placing 3 stitches into the same space. You're making a cluster. Okay, so if you're doing a cluster of 3, that's basically called the granny stitch. You can do 4, you can do 5, you can do 6. I think 5 might be what's called a scallop or a shell. So you might see those terms, but basically it's just how it's a number of double crochet stitches you are placing in one single space. So with a granny stitch, you are chaining in multiples of 3 plus 3, because it takes 3 chains to create this double crochet stitch, and you are basically putting 3 double crochet stitches into one space. You can see each one here. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and you can see that they're all together in this one space. So that's what's called a granny stitch, or maybe sometimes you might see a granny cluster. And in order to get this pattern to work out, it is a repeat pattern. You do need to make your initial chain in multiples of 3 plus 3, because your turning chain will count as part of the stitch. And yeah, you're basically just putting 3 double crochet stitches into the same space. And there's that. That's all my notes on that. So that again, great for blankets, very popular. I think everyone has seen a granny stitch or a granny square at some point. So that's basically all it is. Again, that's what I've said before in a previous video. If you are comfortable with making a single crochet stitch, you're comfortable with making a half double crochet stitch, you're comfortable making a double crochet stitch, which this is, there really isn't anything you can't make, because most patterns are done with those stitches. It's just a matter of where you're placing it, if you're going through just the front loop, going through just the back loop, going through both loops, going through a front post, going through a back post, or if you're placing them in the same space. Okay, so that's all you're doing. That's all most of this really is. So there's that. And because we are on the topic of a double crochet and granny stitch, I was going to show you how to make the granny square, but I think that might be another lesson. I don't want to confuse you folks. Again, the lesson in the project will be the headband, whether it's twisted or it's a straight close. But I think what I will cover in this little supplemental, in case I don't get to it, is here is the granny square in its evolution. Let me just put all my stuff off to the side here. I can bring this into view. So your granny square basically just starts off your chaining 4. That's it. And then you bring it onto itself to make these clusters. So again, here's the center, here is the next row, here is the next row, and there's the final product there. And when I'm showing and demonstrating granny squares to my absolute beginner group, for me, I'm a very visual learner. I like to see, because it may not be easy to tell that this is how your granny square starts. You add a second row, because we're not working back and forth, we're working in the round. So your next row is going around, this next row working around, and this next row working around. So if you make and again, these are made up of double crochet stitches, just placing them into the same space in your first round. And then in the next round, see how you don't see these because you're putting these two pink into that corner. Okay. And also one point I'm going to make now is when you're first learning to do granny squares, I do highly recommend that you use different colors for each round, because if you make your granny square in one color as you're learning, it will be very difficult to see where you're going into. And actually, you know what, I might just do a granny square for you or with you while I'm here. So we will use these for, you know, just random colors here that I grabbed. This is actually a great, what they call a yarn stash project, because it doesn't take a lot to make a square. So if you got extra used yarn from previous projects laying around, you can use those. And so let's see here, give you a crash course in granny square. So if you can chain and you can double crochet, you can make a granny square. It's really easy. So I'm going to make my slip knot. I know I show you guys frogs in a log. I don't actually use frogs in a log. I just make my slip knot the way I make it. These are all 4-weight yarn, by the way, just for what it's worth. Again, I'm using my 5mm crochet hook. I made my slip knot. You are chaining 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, hang on, I missed that last one. 4. And what you're doing is you are putting this, you're putting your hook into that first stitch, and you are making a slip stitch with that. You are closing it off. Okay, now you have a little circle, and you have to find that center. Okay, you got to find that center. You are working your double crochets into the center. We are now making this. Okay, so you're working into that center there. So we are going to chain 3 because your double crochet stitches for this granny square are 3 chains high. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3. Keep your finger in that hole there. You want to make sure you know where that is. And double crochet. Your chain 3 counts as your first double crochet. So we're going to do 2 more. We're going to put your hook into, well, we're going to wrap it. Okay, you're making your double crochet, you're going to wrap the hook. You're going to stick it into that center. You're pulling your yarn through. So you've got 3 loops now on your hook. You're going to wrap that hook, it's a yarn over. You're going to pull through 2, wrap, pull through 2. Okay, so that's 2. Yeah. Again, your chain 3, because it looks similar to a double crochet, acts as 1 double crochet. So we gotta do 1 more. You're gonna wrap that hook, into the center and pull it through. You got 3 chains, wrap the hook, pull through 2, wrap, pull through 2. That is your first cluster. You have just made your first cluster. So this is your granny cluster, your granny stitch. 3 double crochets into the same space. And what we have here is you've got to connect these clusters by chaining 2. Everyone's going to make their granny squares different. Some people will only chain 1, some will chain 2 between spaces. I chain 2. It's just what I've always done. I just find it looks neater. It's a matter of preference. So again, there's going to be a big debate as to how many do you do. Do what looks good for you. So again, crochet, not right, not wrong, preference. So we're going to chain 2 because we have to get 2. We have to create the space. And again, we're going to wrap the yarn. We're going to double crochet again, making 3 more double crochets into that center. This is a repeat pattern, by the way. You're just putting a cluster into each open space. And between those open spaces, you're putting 2 chains. Okay? See? Starting to look like part of the square. You've got your 3 double crochets we just did. We're, again, each cluster, you're putting 2 chains. And then you are putting in 3 more double crochet stitches into that very center hole. Okay, so now we have 3 clusters of our 4. You can see it's starting to look like a square. I mean, if it's rounded, trust the process. It'll all work out. Okay, and because we've just finished a cluster, a granny square cluster, we need to chain 2, because now we have to make the work come this way to finish our square. And we're going to put 3 more double crochet stitches into that center hole there. Oops, make sure you grab all the strands. And we just finish that off there. Last one. Okay, we've got 3 double crochets. See how it's looking a little more square there? We've got to finish off that corner. Each corner gets 2 chains. And then here's where we started. This is our first chain of 3 that counts as our first double crochet. And what you want to do, once you've got your 2 chains to make that corner, we have to slip stitch. So we're going to put our hook through the first loop, or the front loop, and we're going to put our hook through the back loop, and we're going to just pull the yarn through and pull the yarn through. And you have just created this. This is your first round of the granny square. Okay? And you can technically continue with the same color and make a continuous granny square. Perfectly fine, perfectly normal. I do that with the Lion brand big ice cream scoop, and I just make one big blanket. Or if you want to do individual squares to make a granny square blanket or a vest or a sweater or whatever, you can make multiple squares. But for me, I'm going to just sort of snip the yarn. I'm going to set the yellow aside. I'm going to pull that through. And for me, let's see, where is my yarn needle? I would typically just weave in the ends at this point. I would get a yarn needle and I would start hiding it into, like, you're gonna see there's a front side, like a right side where it looks nice, and the back side looks, it still doesn't look bad, but you can kind of tell it's not as neat as this side here. I would flip it over and I would weave in this little tail. I'd go down the post and I would sort of bring it into this circle. And if you don't like that the size of the circle is so spaced out and wide, you just give it a pull and you close it. Okay, so I'm going to leave the ends here because I don't actually have my yarn needle handy. I wasn't sort of expecting to do a live demonstration in this video, but I say to use different colored yarns so that you can see where you're working into. So we're going to do the next one in this pink. It's not the same color pink, but you know, you'll be able to get a nice visual. You'll be able to see it. You'll be able to see where you're working into. Let me just unravel this. Again, I wasn't fully prepared to do this with you on camera, but while we're here, we may as well. There we go. So we're making this portion here. And again, you can use the same color yarns, or you can make a solid color granny square, perfectly fine, perfectly normal. But when you're learning, again, I highly recommend you use different colors. Even if you only have two and you alternate each one, because you're going to be able to see where you're going. Alright, so what we're going to do, let's see here, we are going to attach, I'm just going to start fresh. There's different ways to attach a new color. I'm going to just start off by making a slip knot. Okay, again, I know I show you guys frogs in a log, I don't make mine that way, but I'm going to just start off with the regular slip knot, and I always start off in a corner. So I'm going to, don't worry about the yellow strands, pretend they don't exist. I'm going to start off in the corner, so I'm going to make my slip knot. I'm putting my yarn in through, it doesn't matter which corner, pick one. I'm going to grab that yarn, I'm going to slip it right on there like that. Okay, here's where we make our chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Again, this is going to count as your first double crochet, and we're putting clusters into each of these corner pieces. Okay, so that was our first one of double crochet. I'm going to do another cluster or another double crochet stitch. Put 3 all together, so there's your chain 3, double crochet, double crochet. This is a corner. Okay, so each, actually going to be putting 2. You're going to have chain 2, and each corner gets another cluster. So we're working 2 granny stitches, 2 clusters into the same space. Okay, and once if we're going over a cluster, that gets 1 chain. We're working into corner, double crocheting, 2 sets of clusters, or 2 sets of granny stitches. So there's 1. It's a corner. It gets 2 chains before you make your next set of double crochet stitches. Okay, so see, it's not starting to take shape here. This is the bottom here. Okay, we need to cross this gap by creating a single chain, and then we're going into this corner here, so we're going to double crochet, 2 sets of granny stitches, and because it's a corner, it gets 2 chains. before you make the next cluster. And I hope I'm in frame. And I'm using a webcam. I was using my phone for a bit. Alright, so there's, see how you're making your corners? Yeah, it's all coming together. And again, we gotta cross this area here by making one chain. We're back where we started. We're putting 2 clusters, 2 sets of granny stitches into this corner here. Okay, and we're going to chain 2 because we're in a corner. Get a little more yarn here. Finish this off. Already chain 2. Here's our last cluster of 3 double crochet stitches. Okay, see, 1, 2, 3, and because we're crossing this gap, it takes 1 chain to do that. Here's where we started. See, there's our starting spot there. Here's your initial chain 3. We're gonna make sure we get all 3. 1, 2, 3 at the top of this one here. We're gonna slip stitch into that, so make sure you grab that front loop. Make sure you grab that back loop. Okay, gonna wrap the yarn through. Be a little tight here, but we are just slip stitching, and that's the end of row number 2. Okay, all making sense? So basically, it's a repeat pattern. Once you get past this first center where you initially chain 4 to start, and you go back in, excuse me, on itself, and then you chain 3 to get the height, and you make your first cluster. It's just a repeat pattern. So at each corner, you're putting in 2 double crochet, like granny stitches. So you got 1 set here, you got 1 set here, and each corner you're putting in 2 chains. In between your corners, you're putting in 1 chain, and that's pretty much what you're doing all around. So of course, each round gets bigger, you can have more spaces, so you're going to have, coming up in this purple, we're going to, here's what you've just finished, and so you're going to be putting in a cluster, 2 clusters in the corner. Your 2 clusters get 2 chains. You're going to have a space here. You put in 1 cluster separated by 1 chain, and then you're back into the corner again. You get your 2 clusters in the corner separated by 2 chains, and it's just a repeat. Okay, that's all we're doing. So again, I'm going to just sort of pull and give myself a little bit of a tail to weave in. Going to take this, toss it over there, pull that through. I really do want to find my yarn needle because it's bothering me that I've got these loose ends here. I don't like it. So I'm going to just grab a little plastic one for now, show you how to hide in these ends. Okay, you just, because you are using different colors, or if you are using different colors, you would want to probably tie in your ends, weave in your ends into a similar color. Ooh, this is gonna give me a hard time. Here we go. So this is the back side. You can tell it's all your stragglers are on this side. So you're just weaving it. You're not going all the way through. You're sort of hiding your ends into, I'm going to work my way into this center where we kind of made that circle. Make sure you don't catch the other strands there. You're sort of just weaving. You don't pull too tight. You don't want to misshapen your project. And I'm going to just wool it in. It's a really cheap, flimsy plastic yarn needle. Doesn't want to cooperate. It keeps catching. So I'm just sort of hiding it in there. And if you don't want that center hole to be as big as it is, once you get your yarn in there, you can kind of just sort of pull it. Okay, so you're weaving in your ends. That one should be good enough. And just sort of snip it. And you pretty much do the same thing with the rest of these. You're just finding similar colored spaces to hide in your ends. So in this case, I'm going to go back in through this center, this corner here, and just sort of hide it in there. And not pulling it too tight. I'm going to sort of skip a couple of stitches there and bring it back through. That should be fine for that one. Throw that over there. And the same thing. Just going to hide in the ends in the similar color. So I'm going to sort of bring it through the center area a bit. There we go. Bring it around. Really wishing I could find my other, I did see my other aluminum needle earlier, but you know, I'm not gonna need it. Then you don't have a script to work off of, you're just sort of winging the entire video. Next time I'll know, have everything handy, because, you know, spontaneous things happen. Here we go. There's that one. Just sort of snip it. And same with this one. There we go. And we came in from that direction, so I'm going to bring it down through the next space. Don't want to pull too tight. I'm going to hide it underneath this corner like that. Go in back the other way. Okay. And snip it off there. Rid of that. So there. Just done row number 2. Row number 3. Again, you'll be doing the same thing like I mentioned. You're basically taking the next color, or if you're continuing on, you would just continue on. You would, for me, I like to work in a corner space, like to start in the corner space. That way I remember, okay, I'm in a corner, I need to put 2 clusters into that corner, and then to separate the clusters, you're putting in 2 chains. So if you remember, 2 clusters, 2 chains, 2 clusters, 2 chains. You're going over a single space, single chain. Working into a corner, 2 clusters in the corner, 2 chains in the corner. And back, single space, single chain. And the same is true once you get further out. 2 clusters, 2 chains. You're working over a single space, single chain. And as you, again, you only put 2 clusters into the corners. If it's not a corner space you're working into, it gets a single cluster separated by a single chain. Single cluster, single chain. Working into a corner, 2 clusters, 2 chains. And that's the repeat pattern for as big as you want to, so you can see that each progressive round you're getting, you know, 1 single space, 2 single spaces, but each single space you get a single chain in between. You got your double clusters in the corner separated by 2 chains. Then you're working single spaces, single chains, back to a corner. You get 2 clusters, 2 chains, and you just keep going around and around and around for as big as you want your squares to be. In my case, my square's 5 inches by 5 inches using a 5mm hook. So when you are making a blanket, you pretty much can't, for me it's easy math. I like easy math. My brain doesn't work well with numbers, so I can do multiples of 5 real easy in my head. So I know if I need to make a granny square blanket that is 60 inches by 60 inches, I know I need to have enough squares to make sure I've got 12 squares wide by 12 squares long, and that math, 12 times 12 is 144. I would need to make 144 squares of that size to make a 60-inch by 60-inch blanket, which I've done a few of. I've made a few king-size blankets. I think those are like, I think those are 16 rows by 16, yeah, I think it's like 16 by 16 is what I end up doing for that. But yeah, you can make these as really as small as you want. You can make them any size in between. You can just keep adding to them. That would be a continuous granny square. That's perfectly fine and very popular. Or if you want to make different color, like motif style, I guess, squares, then you would then, you know, put them together. You can crochet it closed, you can whip stitch it closed, you can, there's various ways. I'll at some point make a video on that. But for now, again, the whole point of this video was to let you guys know that there are different variations that can be done to when you're creating a double crochet stitch. So again, granny square, very popular, and our next lesson after this one coming up will be making that. Oops. So yeah, you can make granny square clusters or granny clusters in a rectangular form, also for blankets or for scarves. The cluster is also a good trim, so if you have a blanket or a scarf and let's say you wanted to have it, you're just doing a basic double crochet sort of stitch, nothing fancy, you're working in through, you know, both front and back loops, you're keeping it flat, you could alternately make a border and create clusters around it just to kind of give it a little something extra. So again, the double crochet stitch is very versatile. It's used in various stitch patterns. There probably are more that I just don't know about, but again, I can't show you what I don't know. But again, this is meant to be supplemental for the upcoming class on Saturday, August 10th at the North Grenville Historical Society. So if you want to join me there, I will demonstrate this in person, the actual stitch itself. We're making headbands / ear warmers. So I'll have, again, a pattern for that. I do have a tutorial already done. I will try to link that into the description for this video here. So if you want to, you know, watch this afterwards and then go back and try making a headband using like front post, back post, that's a really cool look too. But yeah, again, I feel like with 2 hours to show and demonstrate the actual learning how to make the stitch and walking you through how to make the project, I don't often have enough time to show you the really cool things that this stitch can do if you've worked it in a different variety of ways. So for me, it's just good to let you know what you can do. You have options. You don't have to make everything flat. You can add a bit of texture to it. So I hope this has helped you. I hope that you have learned something. And if you're going to join me on Saturday, I hope to see you there. So thank you again for joining me here at Heather's Crochet Corner. If you like what I'm doing, please like the video, and by all means leave a comment if you have questions about anything, or if there's a particular project or stitch or something you'd like me to talk more about or to demonstrate. If I know what it is, I'm happy to do it, and if not, I can certainly look it up and give it my best shot. Alright, thanks again. I'll see you next video.